One Jeff is out. We'll bring another Jeff in to talk prospects. Let's be honest, you're all sick of hearing my voice. Let's bring in our favorite guest of Locked On Guardians, Geoff Pontes, on today's episode of Locked On Guardians.
Tanner Bagger of the Guardians, and you're listening to Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to today's episode of Locked On Guardians. I'm your host, Justin Latta. Jeff Ellis still out this week, but he'll be back next week. We bring in, I'm not going to say he's our second best Jeff, but he's our favorite guest, Geoff Pontes of Baseball America, helping me convert everybody online to Swenson's one post at a time. What's up, Jeff?
What's going on? Yeah, that was my standout of my Lake County trip from this summer, was your recommendation to Swenson's. I went there twice, and it feels like now I'm inundated with Swenson content. Like, there's a burger place in New York City that just opened up by some famous burger chef. I'm forgetting his name. But he has different burgers that are from all different parts of the country. So it's supposed to be like an examination of like American burgers. So they'll have like the onion cheeseburger from like Oklahoma that you've probably seen. They had a galley boy. And so I was like, and somebody asked me, like, what's a galley boy? Like, I went to the Instagram comments and I was like, wow, it's tartar sauce and barbecue, his little olive on top. But you got to try the potato tweezers. Those are the best. And I like that Jameis then shows up at Swenson's. I think he's at the actual Swenson's that I went to, because it looks exactly like where I was. I'm not sure, because that was Eastlake, right? So I have no idea if he would have been over there or not. But he's there with his family. He's got the tray on there, and he's just being Jameis, which I find Jameis Winston to be incredibly entertaining on camera. So maybe not so much as a football player. I guess it depends what game you're watching. Depends what day of the week it is. But yeah, he talked about the potato tweezers and how they were the standout. And I was like, me and Jameis, we're like this. We get it. You know?
Understand, yeah.
Also,
Not a great time to go to
the drinks.
Oh, yeah.
The
California,
California,
they got great milkshakes. Oh yeah, the California milkshakes are good. Not a great time for milkshakes in Ohio and
or Massachusetts.
Swenson's, because they're running to your car, and you're not trying to. I'm not trying to go out there and get those people working as hard as they do in the snow and the cold weather. But we're converting people one time. I always said LeBron James is their best pitch man, so I can't go against LeBron James. Yeah, he's because. Yeah, Swenson's is originated in Akron, so that's obviously where LeBron's from. So he is their biggest. Every time he came home when he was playing, I think with Miami, I don't know about LA now. When he was with Miami, he was still coming back home and getting Swenson's when he was coming back to Akron. So
awesome.
Still the move. So
yeah,
I don't know. I'm going to Arizona later this month, and I will have In-N-Out, but I had it last year. I don't know. Tacos,
dude, Arizona's the best food. I'll get Phoenix is the best food city in America. It's that in Philly, and then like New York City. But New York City is on such a different scale that I don't even think you can throw it into the conversation. Phoenix is.
I just want New York pizza. That's all I want. Just New York pizza.
Yeah, bagels, a lot of great sandwiches. There's just anything you want in New York. It's just such a huge variation of food. But I will say tacos in Phoenix. I'm going to send you some taco spots. If you like tacos, it's the best. Right. It's the best. These are and it's everywhere. There's so many good taco places. Taco Boys, Vampiros Tacos. Amazing.
We went to a good Mexican place in Scottsdale. That's where we went. So I'll have to
a bunch of stuff around there. I got stuff around there. Mesa has maybe my favorite restaurant. It's actually a New Mexican restaurant. So it's like food from New Mexico. Everything's with like green chilies, and it's incredible. Thompson went there with me. A bunch of other guys have gone there with me. It's called Blue Adobo. It's like I got off the plane. I got off the plane in Phoenix for AFL in October, and I went there before I checked into my hotel. I actually drove from the airport to Blue Adobo. It was like 2:00 in the afternoon there, and I ate. I hadn't eaten all day. And, I'd flown from the East Coast, and I crushed it. And then I went and I checked in the hotel. I had a game that night. I got all my gear charged up. I sat down. I think I watched, might have been the Tigers Guardians series was going on at the time. And watched that game, was still full like 6 hours later. And then I ended up I was cutting video after the first game I saw in Mesa, and then I went to In-N-Out actually because there's one right over there off the campus at ASU. So yeah, I have lots of food recs in Arizona. I love eating in Arizona, and you could cheap taco places, good taco places are cheap. Like you'll go in there and you'll spend $15 and eat like a king. Can't beat that.
I have to come back to some sponsorships there too. Let's talk some prospects. So you obviously, Baseball America. Yeah. At Baseball Americas, we can go on for hours about other stuff. We already have.
Yeah, I can do a food podcast.
Yeah, when I come back from Arizona, maybe that'll be the move next. All right, so your guys' Baseball America top 100 spin out. Your top 30s are all rolling out. What do you make of? Because I've been trying to reconcile this because obviously for years now we've been talking about how got the Cleveland pitching factory, all this kind of stuff, and now your guys' top 10, you have one pitcher, and that seems to be the case across the industry. Is most places top 10 does not include a Guardians pitcher. I'm looking at my own top prospect rankings right now, and I'm having a hard time figuring out what pitcher I'd have in the top 10. Maybe some of the high school kids, I don't know. But what do you make of the fact that the Guardians all of a sudden have way better hitting than pitching? Like, obviously they've struggled for years developing offense, right? They've developed pitching well. Is this just like a weird turn of things, like the cycle of prospect and player development? Or do you feel like this is more like a focus, like they struggled for a long time developing hitting, and maybe now they finally have something here in some of these guys?
Yeah, and I think it's it's also like, where are you spending your money, at the top of the draft? We go back the last few drafts for the Guardians, and you're talking pretty much hitters in the first round.
Delauder,
until
Ralphie,
2021. Yeah, Gavin Williams was the last pitcher who was taken in the first. And I mean, they definitely hit in that draft. They got Gavin Williams. They got Tanner Bybee as well. I think both of those guys are hits. I think you look at like how Franco Elman has developed. That's probably a hit as well. I think Jury is still probably out on the KZ and Mace and Webb and some of these other guys who I think could end up being like back into the rotation pieces or bullpen guys at one point or in time or another. But I think it was a concerted effort, and also where they were drafting when the value was. Because I like a lot of those picks. Like, obviously, Bazana was my favorite player in the draft. We talked about that a lot leading up to the draft for months. DeLauder was my favorite player in that 2022 draft. I was a huge DeLauder fan coming off the Cape. Like, I feel like I saw the biggest sample size that DeLauder's had outside of him being healthy at certain points over the last couple of years. But I saw a stretch run where he was great. And I just, I thought he was a top 5 to 10 player in that draft. Ralphie Velasquez, I think is like kind of, it's funny. Like, I feel like because he gets that first base only tag, and I'm not sure that he necessarily is. Like, it's outlier bat speed, power, field to hit. He might be a better athlete than I think people realize he is. Like, it's not like straight up
the home run he robbed in left field last year.
Yeah. See,
that was legit, right?
Athletic testing sort of says that he could maybe play a serviceable corner outfield spot. He moves quicker than you realize. Like, it's not, this isn't a knock on Kyle Manzardo at all, but like, he's not like Manzardo, who's like not a runner, right? Like, there's not a ton of athleticism here. He's like a super high skill guy. He's got power. It's just it's not like that. And I think where they were drafting at that point in time, it was a really good pick. And then they've just nailed some of their signings in the international market over the last couple of years, right? Like, Jason Churio is a really good prospect, and we get great feedback, like, universally around the game on Churio. There were a couple pieces of move down feedback because we had him so high. But like Carlos Colazo, who does our list, like throughout his process, consistently got really good feedback on Churio. You saw me in Lake County. I love Angel Hanau. Like, he's one of my favorite players. I think like does a lot of things well. I think projects to get stronger, and the skills will sharpen up a little bit. He's still super young for the levels that he played at. And put together like a really good season last year. He hit 330 combined across the two levels, 330, 379, 499 with a 150 WRC plus. Like, just looking at the straight numbers, it's really good. The underlying data is good.
Great runner.
Yeah. I mean, he just does everything pretty well. Like he's the kind of guy, he's just a great take, right? Like you sit on 4 or 5 games with a series that he's playing in, you're going to come away and be like, this guy might be one of the best players in the field. Like, and it was a pretty loaded series. I saw, like Josue Apollo was on the other side. There's a Dodgers, organization, obviously pretty talented teams. And he really stuck out to me as a very good player. Then you get down a little bit further and Welvin Francesca, really good player. I think he's somebody that could maybe even break out a little bit more. Once he's playing at a full season level for a longer period of time. Of course, he, had his ACL stop and then went to low A. But when he has his 2025 healthy, has that full season at a full season level or multiple stops in A ball, probably could be a guy that's in Lake County in the second half, potentially just based on his trajectory. A really good all around player, hits the ball harder than you think. I think some of it's just like bat path and some adjustments, things that can be made. And then you get to guys like Cooper Ingel and CJ Kafis, who weren't first round picks. Ingel signed for $400,000 in the 4th round in 2023. Kafis signed for $700,000 in the 3rd round in the same draft. Both those guys showed they had a really good balance of plate skills and hitting ability. And with Ingel, once the arm was healed, because he wasn't throwing when I saw him on the Cape a couple summers before that, he showed some defensive chops. He's better behind the plate than I ever would have expected because I didn't see him catch. And it was kind of we don't know if he can catch, blah, blah, blah. Kind of hearing that from area scouts when I was seeing him with Chatham. He took a huge step forward. I mean, he's a fringe of the top 100 guy. And I think Francesca is also a fringe of the top 100 guy. Kafis, he's a first baseman, so you really got to mash to do that. He kind of gets the most out of his hard contact, but he's not an outlier, power type of guy, but consistently makes good barrel contact. So he gets more out of that, his flush contact than a lot of other guys do. So I think you kind of look at that group, and then you have Juan Brito, who obviously they had kind of stolen from the Rockies back in 2022. Though Nolan Jones hasn't been bad for Colorado, maybe less so this year, but was pretty good the previous year. And he's a contender to potentially, start games with the Guardians this year. So I think you look at that top 10 and it's all right, they hit on the picks that they made in the 1st round. They hit on some international signees, and they hit on some guys in the 3rd, 4th round. And after having a big draft in 2021 for the pitching, they kind of leaned in on building some hitting and getting some firepower on that side, which I think if you just look at the projections and stuff is an area where, the big league club in the next couple of years probably is going to need some reinforcements, and it could improve. And, let's not fool ourselves into thinking they're not going to spend like the Mets. They're not going to spend like the Dodgers, the Yankees, or the Red Sox, or those sort of teams. So they have to operate, in an agile way in all these different marketplaces and make good decisions and make good buys. And they've done that. So I think part of it is they have spent money at the top of the draft on hitting in the last three draft cycles. They've also hit on those picks, and they've hit on international players. And it's kind of a good problem to have, because I think you then look at this year and you see after Bazana, those high school arms that you kind of mentioned, like Doughty, Oki, what's the other one I'm thinking of? I'm totally Mobley. All of those guys could turn out to be something pretty impressive. And I mean, I've gotten great feedback on Doughty, dating back to last year, to early in camp, that, things are going pretty well. And there's some stuff there and some pitchability, and he's been pretty impressive. Obviously that was bridge league and some of that stuff. So we'll see how it is once he gets to an assignment, whether that's complex league and they build him up and then he ends up in Lynchburg to, at some point in the year. I don't know. But I think there's upside with all those guys. And, we even saw that, a little bit last year from a guy like Clemmy, who, was a cold weather arm up from my way in New England, actually not far from where I grew up, about 20 minutes away at Hendricken, but an interesting tall left-hander. And, they were then able to flip him at the deadline and get some reinforcements in Lane Thomas, which, helped him kind of make that playoff push that they made and, be one of the better teams in the American League last year. So I think you sort of look at the system and say, yeah, it's heavy with hitters at the top, but there's still some arms lurking here that we could come back in a year from now and say, like, that guy took a big step forward, that guy showed something, and now he's a top 10 prospect. It wouldn't shock me if one of these high school guys maybe sneaks their way into the back end of the top 100 even. Like, I kind of think that's where they're at with some of those guys. And then I guess the major enigma is Daniel Espino, and, if he ever
Yeah.
return. I mean, because at the time of him going down, he was the best pitching prospect in baseball. Like, I was going through some of his numbers for a project that I'm doing here and looking back on 2022, and it was like, he was so dominant. Like, it was such a small window, but, at that point you had Gavin Williams in the system. You had, Tanner Bybee, and he was ahead of those guys and like was in AA, was young. So if he can return to health and like we see that Daniel Espino of old at some point in the next year, that's a pretty big win too. So, I mean, who knows where that goes? I don't have any inside information on that. But I also think they have some interesting pitchers that are on the college side. Like, they added Parker Messick, who maybe doesn't have the craziest stuff in the world, but like a ton of pitchability. He's a bulldog in like every sense of that word. Like, just competes, like short, stout lefty. And it's a really good changeup. The cutter's good, the fastball's good enough, and he controls it and hits his spots. And we've seen guys like that have success. And I think the other one, it's kind of a folklore hero at this point. And like our model, like we did
Tugboat,
the model, loves Matt Wilkinson, loves Tugboat. It's an interesting take. I wish it was more like 92 to 93 consistently sitting in that range, because with that shape, with that release height, especially, from a left-hander, like just really unusual. Like you don't see guys like that really.
Yeah. All right. We got to run to a quick break here, and then I'll get back with you on Tugboat. And you had some names you brought up I want to get to, and then I also want to ask you a draft and a player development question that we talked about too. So get to that here in just a second. All right, if you're looking for a snack at the ballpark, look no further than the wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious. They're one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep you fuller, longer. Baseball season's coming up. I know it doesn't feel like baseball season's here in the Northeast and in the Midwest, but it's coming, and you want to swap out one of those snacks, something healthier. Pistachios is a good way to go. It's delicious, and it is healthier for you. And the no-shell, in-shell options are always a classic favorite. You can do it on your car. You can do it at the game, at your desk, all kinds of places. You can get crackin, get snackin with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, I know I got like everyone in the comments who's like, "Why did you cut Geoff off? He's so good. Got to pay the bills." But all right, because we could go on forever, and I gotta pay our bills a little bit here. But all right, you're talking about Tugboat real quick. Finish what you were saying on Tugboat. I'm going to ask you about a couple of the hitters, and then also I want to get your take on Austin Peterson, and then I want to do a draft and development question. So where were you at on Tugboat?
I mean, I just think it's like you don't see lefties that have like that unique of a fastball. I saw it obviously in Lake County, and he can dominate with that pitch. It's just a matter of like, how do the secondaries come along? And you just love to see a little bit more velocity. He has the kind of shape, he doesn't have to be 4 to 5. Like, it can be like slightly below average velocity where he's sitting, like I said, that 91 and 93 range with like a 92.8, like kind of average velocity number. He would be dominant. Just that little bit more of fastball velocity, I think could potentially take up. And he's young enough that it's not like out of the realm of possibility. I just don't know, if you can coax any more out of him. I guess that's always the question with these guys. So that's certainly one that's up in the air, and we just sort of got to figure it out and see where it goes.
Yeah, there is that like baseline of velocity, right? You have to hit a certain threshold of velocity to succeed, and before everyone's going to believe you, like you said. Like that's where I'm at with Doug. When I'm like, if he doesn't have that like bare minimum velocity to get by, like you always wonder like when when it's going to stop working against upper level hitters. And there's such a gap now between these levels, especially AAA and the majors. It's like it's so hard to bet. But you're right, lefty makes a lot more sense, and it's unique. Like you just kind of wonder what kind of fastball velocity he's got to get to. I was really surprised. You were talking about Cooper Ingel. I was super surprised at how much hype he got over the offseason. Like, as far as like data goes, like he's not an exit velocity monster. He doesn't have like a above average raw power. I know you don't have to have much power to play at catcher, obviously, but like the arm is kind of fringe. Like he's a good mover. So like all these things that like make Cooper Ingel are a good prospect. It's always like I feel like he's like, I'm not saying he's not a good prospect, obviously, because you guys like him. A lot of other people like him. I just feel like it's so weird for a catcher who doesn't have a ton of power, but also we kind of know like the arm is not super plus, but the other actions kind of make up for it. So I was really surprised at like how much he rose up interest this offseason, truthfully, after his good 2024.
Well, he's a guy that like shows up well in a lot of models too. Like I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is like at the catcher position, the bar to hit, if you can block, frame, manage the pitching staff enough, like they can deal with the arm enough, but I mean, it's easy plus contact. Like, it was like a 9.6% in zone miss rate, 14.4 overall, 20% chase rate. He can be a little bit passive, but I think you sort of look at that and it's like, all right, like this guy, it's like potentially a plus hit tool. It maybe doesn't have the most bat speed and those sort of intangibles, but makes enough flush contact, hits the ball in the air enough that you can kind of project for enough power. And it's like, all right, like if we can get a catcher that hits 280 with 12 home runs, right? And can catch
when they've been
85 games for us or whatever. Like that's a big win. Like getting a catcher that can hit is super valuable. And I think teams just generally value that a lot. Like, I don't know if he's their catcher of the future or anything like that, but I think he's a valuable piece for sure. And, when you look at models, like he grades out crazy when it comes to contact and decisions.
Yeah, the swing Guardians do love their swing decisions, absolutely, and they've got nothing out of catcher offensively. Like they had a random year from Roberto Perez in 2019, and Bo Naylor had a good second half of 2023. And I'm still a believer in Bo Naylor personally. I've seen him I explained this earlier this week on the podcast, that like he had a terrible 2021 coming out of the pandemic, and he turned himself back around in 2022. And then we saw the second half of 2023 when he made his debut. He was good. So like I still buy that there's a good version of Bo Naylor offensively in there.
Yeah.
And he's got a better arm than Ingel, and the framing has been better. I just wonder how much longer framing is gonna matter that much. So like the power and the arm like have to be valuable.
They're not going full auto zone. The full auto zone in AAA was wackadoo. Like it was crazy. I think hitters didn't like it, pitchers didn't like it. I guess there were some hitters, like if you're passive enough, like it will work.
Yeah.
Challenge system is good, and you have to be strategic about how you use it. So it adds another layer of strategy into the game, which I think is something that if you're someone who watches baseball and enjoys watching baseball, you enjoy strategy. Otherwise, you wouldn't watch this game, right? You just watch the highlights on SportsCenter and be like, "Ooh, look at that home run," But I think it adds to it, and the fans love it. And it's really easy and clean. I saw both systems in AAA last year, and there were times with the auto zone where you're like, it's a quarter of an inch off the plate. That's been a strike for 150 years, and like now we're going on with this computer. And on top of it, like the zone, depending upon where and I've talked to hitters about this, depending upon where you were in AAA, sometimes the zone is higher, sometimes it's lower. So there's certain types of fastballs and location and stuff that like you may get that in 5 parks, but then in another 3, you can't. You got to throw that a little bit lower, and then you're throwing it, a lot closer to the belt high fastball, and all of a sudden, like those pitches are getting nuked. I felt like pitching in AAA with the ABS was harder than pitching in the major leagues, just from a strike zone perspective. Obviously, the hitters you're going to face in the major leagues are the best, but we saw hitters having a harder time adjusting to the major leagues because they weren't dealing with that zone versus pitchers who were getting crushed in AAA and then get called up to the major leagues, and then were finding more success and throwing more strikes because they weren't dealing with that crazy ABS, you know?
I didn't consider that. Okay, well, that makes a lot more sense now because I think there was a lot of that going on last year. I think hitters too, the same thing. Like hitters had a better understanding what a strike was going to be in the majors than they did in the minors. And I think that spoke to some of the guys who had call-ups in the second half. Like Kyle Manzardo had a much better September last year, and I don't know how much the ABS played into that or the weird strike zone, but that makes a lot more sense now, and I think that's a good way to judge against it. All right, we're gonna do one draft question or one player development question. I could have like 30 more questions. We could do this podcast for an hour, truthfully, but we only have a half hour, and no, you're good. And
my computer was like about to die, and I needed to plug it in, so I was like, I don't want to die on air.
Don't want to lose you. All right, well, we got more coming up here on the rest of this episode of Locked On Guardians. NBA season, it is rolling on. We're getting ready to start the second half. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. No better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You can place live bets throughout the game with FanDuel. So if you miss the opening tip-off and you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, I know Geoff and I can talk about Cavs and Celtics at some point, not today, but in general, you can stand on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your bets into a same game parlay. I love doing it personally because I do like the same game parlays. Honestly, I like doing the player stats versus the just straight up game lines, all that kind of stuff. Haven't checked the odds for the Guardians, and I did see someone tell me that they were over under on 77 wins or something recently. I have to double check that now. Last I checked, it was 82.5, but we'll do that again soon. Right now, new FanDuel customers, you can get $100 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Not going to talk Cavs Celtics here because that could be a much longer conversation. But
I was going to say, I think we're going to be battling that one out as the season progresses.
I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a good series. I think it'll be a much better series than it was previously, and they've had some good battles this year.
Yeah.
We were talking off air a little bit about like last year, and Jeff Ellis and I have had this talk on air, so people are familiar with this if they've listened. Is the Padres did this thing last year, and the Padres are different. AJ Preller is a little bit different of a GM, but they have loved to trade their high school talent, and obviously they're like in a competitive window, and they're trying to maximize all these contracts they put out there. But like it begs the question, and with the Guardians taking all these high school pitching, so it's not necessarily them, but do these high school players like carry value longer? Like, do you take a high school kid and it's like, okay, maybe he won't pan out right away, but if we want to trade him, like we have more opportunities to see what happens with him, whether it's internal development or necessarily a trade in the long run?
I think they got more runway, particularly pitchers. We did a study on it, and the average time that it takes a high school pick from getting drafted to when they're like part of a rotation or have a role, in the big leagues that's kind of permanent, 6 years. So when it's 6 years, you got a lot of runway. And we all know injuries, there's nicks and bruises. All these guys are going to deal with some hurdle that they have to overcome, on their development path getting up to the big leagues. So I think that's part of it. I think especially in the first couple of years, if these guys have interesting traits, like we saw it with Clemmy last year, who does have some interesting traits, those guys typically hold value a little bit longer and can be more attractive in a trade. Where when you draft college players, you want to see what like Ingel and Kafis did last year. You want to see those guys move quickly. You want to see them have success quickly and be pushing up to the big leagues within a couple of years. So you kind of know what you got sometimes with college hitters too. Like there's just less development. They're already more physical. When you're dealing with 18, 19-year-old kids, sometimes older 17-year-olds, right, that are just eligible for the draft, depending upon when their birthday is, I think they just hold more value. And especially if it's a team that's looking to rebuild, they're going to take guys like that, in trade, especially for players that have a year or two left in their deal. It clears up a 40-man spot. It does all those things. And it kind of kicks the can down the road in terms of what the decisions are that you have to make. So I think particularly like prep pitching is a good way to go with that. The prep hitters that get into the draft now, you're not getting any steals anymore. Those guys are pretty much going day one, or they're getting big overslot money if they're getting drafted in later rounds, because so many more, there's less rounds, so many more talented high school players are getting to campus now than ever before on the hitting side, particularly. I mean, you see it. Like, go and look at how spread out the talent is in college baseball right now. Like, you can watch some of these good mid-majors and you'll see standout freshmen and you're like, wow, this dude didn't get $1 million last year? Like, really? And there's a lot of guys that get drafted in the later rounds. Like Mike Sirota is one example, where obviously it didn't go great for him his junior year at Northeastern, but leading up to that point, he looked like a no doubt first rounder. Of course, the Dodgers went out and then traded for him again because they couldn't sign him. But he went to Northeastern. Like, it's not even like he was at LSU or Texas A&M or Florida or any of these big programs who always pull down big freshmen. Now it's happening like all across the board. The draft talent is way more spread out. And so, like, I think it's prep pitching because more of those guys sign. And I think it's advantageous to get into a pro program and maybe get, learn from pro coaches and nutrition and all that sort of stuff. Now, on the other side, I think that it's also, you can make, the other side of the coin, you can make an argument that pitching in college, pitching in games that mean something, having to go deep into starts and throw those stressful innings and build up innings also can portend success as a professional. But there's different ways to do it, and we've seen success both ways. And I think that the upside on some of these high school pitchers, because you're like, we got 3 years until he would be draft eligible as a college guy. And a lot of development can happen on the pro side, with players like that. So there's a ton of examples, a lot of first round guys that have been really, really good, but also these guys in the second, third round who have popped as well. So I think they hold value. And I think those first 2 years, teams that might have been on them in the draft still view them as the same sort of talent. So they hold that. Their shelf life's a little bit longer, right? Their expiration date doesn't hit as early as it does with a college pitcher or a college hitter, where once they're in the system, you're like, within 2 years, I should know if this guy's going to be a big league regular or not,
Yeah, there's such a risk in high school pitching in general. And Cleveland hasn't done a great job developing in the past. Like, if you look at their major league roster right now, it's Sam Henches and Tristan McKenzie. And that's kind of it. But I that's what we were saying, is like, it just seems like the shelf life, like you said, is a ton longer. I guess too, depends on where you end up too. Like, if you end up at a Wake Forest or an LSU, like, you get similar development opportunities.
Arkansas.
You also get some you get some NIL out of it. So there's still it's still like a similar benefit. But yeah, if you're not going to campus to one of those,
but you got to pitch your way into the rotation at those places. Like, that's the other thing, right? Is like, you also need to compete now with like 23-year-old, like, grad, grad assistants or grad signs or whatever the heck it is. Where like these guys are on like their 4th, 5th year of college baseball and, have already pitched in those big games. And there's a lot of programs that are just happy to take those guys and not take shots on upside either, and just stick you in the bullpen. And it's why we've seen more bullpen arms make the jump to starters, as pros and have success. I mean, there's been a bunch of Florida guys, it feels like they all went to the Mets, that were all predominantly in the bullpen most of their college careers, and maybe had, some chance to start later. Yeah. Or Christian Scott, there's a few of them. Nolan McLean obviously was a two-way player. Like, there's just some interesting sort of wrinkles to it. But I do think the value for those players is definitely held a little bit longer, especially in that like first 2 to 3 year window, where teams may view it as like, hey, we do this differently than so-and-so does. And I'm talking generalities now, not specifically about the Guardians, but like, the Rays feel they can go and get this guy and they can change something, or have him lean in on this, or he has one trait. We can get him, we can get him to throw a nasty 2-seamer if, we just get him to work on this particular grip, and we got a coach that can do that. I think it's a lot about like how it's an old Bill Parcells line, right? But it's like, about shopping for the groceries. If you want me to cook the meal, you should at least let me shop for the groceries. But I think it like taking that concept and extending it, it's like, your job identifying talent for your organization is to shop for the right groceries so that your player development can make the meal that they're good at making, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I always say, like, you don't buy a bunch of ingredients to make a great Mexican or, a great Japanese meal for a great French chef. You're going to get him ingredients to make that great French meal. And I think it's the same with a lot of teams where they identify certain traits and they're like, that's the kind of guy we can turn into this,
And that's why Cleveland loves their swing decisions. That's their big swing decisions and contact. They know what they can get out of that, and it remains to be seen how much power they can develop out of that. But like we talked about, the hitting is flourishing right now. Hopefully, the pitching will continue to match. I wish we had more time to talk like Austin Peterson, and we talked about some of the high school guys, but perhaps sometime in the future, possibly we can get back on that. But won't keep any longer. It's super late, and I apologize to all of our listeners who I know are like, let Geoff talk for like an hour, because I literally every time you're on, everyone's like, just shut up and let Geoff talk, or have you on more. So I will say, in your tenure of coming on here, I think you're now our most reoccurring guest, and definitely by far, if I ran any sort of popularity polling, you would come number one, pretty sure. But you're on mute, so that's going to knock your points down a little bit. You're still muted.
I was going to say that I appreciate that, and I love Guardians fans, and the Cleveland area I visit at least once a year, and enjoy my time there. So
I was going to wear my Akron Galley Boys shirt today, and I completely forgot. My wife got me for my birthday, or was it Christmas? I can't remember when it was, but that promotion came out, and I was like, oh, got to get Geoff to an Akron game when the Akron Galley Boys commercial comes up. Yeah. If you're in town, I'll make sure you get one. I got one for my birthday or Christmas for my wife. It was a nice, really nice
100%.
logo. Well done. I can't believe they didn't do it sooner. It's been overdue for them. So good for Akron for doing that. And
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on again, man. I do appreciate it. I hope everybody appreciated it as well. Let Geoff know. I know he's got a bunch of good stuff in the works of Baseball America, and if you got the means to do so, I highly, highly recommend. Not just because Geoff's a guest on the show, but I've been a VA subscriber for years before Geoff was even on board, and I continue to be, because I think it's the best value for your money. You get draft, you get prospects, you get all kinds of fantasy stuff now too, which is fantastic, and just all around good people. You can feel good about supporting good people, doing good content. My book should be here. My wife got me the book for my birthday. I always get the book every year, and that should be here in a few days too. So yeah, if you have the means to do so, support Baseball America, and follow Geoff wherever you get your baseball content. All right, thanks for listening to today's Locked On Guardians. Tomorrow, mailbag episode. So send in your questions for that. Geoff should be back on Monday with us. We'll see about that. Hopefully he's back sooner than later, because I'm going to Arizona next week. So he'll need to be back at some point. So get your mailbag questions in while you can. And thanks again to Geoff today. And in the meantime, go Guardians, go. Baseball weather is just around the corner, I promise.